The small body in the pink coat stumbled forward, and the world turned to screaming. 3-year-old Emma Castellano's face twisted red, her breath coming in panicked gasps that wouldn't fill her lungs. She had broken free from her nanny's grip at the corner of Paradise Road. 1 second of distraction, 1 second of a child's curiosity about a bird landing on the sidewalk, and now she stood frozen between lanes of moving traffic, her tiny fingers outstretched toward nothing, her mouth open in a sound that cut through the afternoon like a blade. Sofia Voss was 40 feet away, carrying a delivery order in both hands. 2 bottles of wine, an entree wrapped in white paper, a dessert box balanced on top. She didn't think. She didn't calculate the distance or the speed of the approaching Mercedes or the weight of what she was about to do. Her body simply moved, dropping the entire delivery onto the concrete, watching the bottles shatter in slow motion, watching her only chance at a $20 tip evaporate into wine-stained pavement. Her worn sneakers slapped concrete as she ran. The horns came first, a blast of sound so loud it seemed to split the air itself. Sofia's legs pumped harder, her cheap nanny uniform pulling at her shoulders, the summer heat bearing down on her back. Emma was still frozen, still crying, still 30 feet away and closing down like a coffin. Sofia's lungs burned. Her eyes locked on the child's face, on those wide brown eyes that belonged to the only family she had left in this city, not by blood, but by the way Emma's small hand had started reaching for her at night, the way the child whispered Sofia's name like a prayer. 1 second before the Mercedes roared past, Sofia's arms closed around Emma, lifting her, spinning her away from the rush of metal and velocity that missed them by the width of a breath. The child's tiny fingers clutched Sofia's nanny uniform, hyperventilating against her shoulder, her small body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane. Sofia rocked her, whispering words she didn't remember learning, calm words, steady words, her hand pressed to the back of Emma's head, checking for blood, for injuries, for any sign that she had been too slow. A small bruise on the child's knee. That was all. The screeching of tires came next. Not the Mercedes, 3 black SUVs, each the size of a tank, pulling to sharp stops around them like predators closing in. Sofia's body went rigid. She had lived in Las Vegas long enough to know what black SUVs meant. She had heard the whispers in the hotel kitchen, seen the way doormen's faces changed when certain cars pulled up to the entrance of the Venetian. Nothing good came in black SUVs. Doors opened. Men emerged. Not doormen or security guards, but something else entirely. Their suits were tailored, expensive, cut to conceal the weapons underneath. Their faces were expressionless as stone. They moved in perfect formation, spread across the sidewalk, cutting off the street, cutting off escape. Then he stepped out. Giovanni Castellano was 6 feet 3 inches tall, his shoulders broad enough to block out the sun. His charcoal suit cost more than Sofia made in 3 months. The fabric had a sheen that spoke of money and power and a level of confidence she had never witnessed in another human being. His dark hair was slicked back from his face, revealing the scar that cut through his left eyebrow like a second, angry mouth. His eyes found his daughter. For one moment, just one, his entire face shifted. The hardness dissolved. He looked at Emma cradled in Sofia's arms, at the way the child's breathing was finally slowing, at the tenderness with which this stranger in a cheap nanny uniform was rocking his daughter back into something like safety. Something dangerous stirred behind his eyes. Not anger. Something deeper. Rocco and Theo, his lieutenants, reached for their weapons instinctively. Hands moved toward jacket hems. Sofia's heart stopped. She pulled Emma tighter, her body becoming a shield without thinking about it, still not understanding that she was standing in front of the most dangerous man in Las Vegas while holding his child. Giovanni raised one hand. Stop. Just that one word, just that gesture, and his men froze mid-motion like puppets whose strings had been cut. The entire street held its breath. Emma's small voice emerged, muffled against Sofia's shoulder. Colors, she whispered. I want colors. Sofia didn't hesitate. She pulled a small piece of fabric from her pocket, a scrap of cloth, rainbow-colored, worn soft from being held by small fingers. She had cut it from an old dress, stitched it with careful hands, because Emma sometimes cried about sad colors, and Sofia had learned that if you gave her something bright, something that lived in every shade of the spectrum at once, the anxiety would fade. Emma grabbed the fabric and held it to her face. Giovanni watched this. He watched the gentleness with which this exhausted woman moved, the way her voice became soft as silk, the way she asked questions, gentle, patient questions, about whether the bruise hurt, whether Emma felt sick, whether she was afraid. He watched his daughter's breathing steady. He watched her fall quiet in the arms of a stranger. In 15 years, Rocco had never seen his boss's expression change like this. In 15 years, they had never seen him look at anything with this kind of hunger. Not wealth. Not power. Not conquest. But this, watching a woman who wore a uniform stained with someone else's coffee hold his daughter with the tenderness that his own childhood had never known. The moment stretched. Traffic continued around them. The city hummed with indifference. Then Giovanni moved forward, his steps measured and deliberate. Sofia's body tensed, her arms tightening around Emma. She knew nothing about this man except what she saw: the expensive suit, powerful bearing, men with weapons circling them like wolves. "You have her," Giovanni said. His voice was deep, solid like an oath. Not a question. Sofia found herself nodding, though her throat had gone dry as bone. "She's safe," Sofia said. "I have her." His eyes met hers. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition that neither expected, a weight settling into place like a stone dropped into still water. "Your name," he said. "Sofia," she whispered. "Sofia Voss." Giovanni Castelliano didn't blink. He simply nodded, as though he had written something down inside his mind, as though her name had been carved into something permanent. "Rocco," he said, his voice never wavering. "See that this woman receives payment for the delivery that was lost." Sofia's eyes widened. The broken bottles. The spilled wine. That had been the only tip she had expected in an 8-hour shift, and now it was scattered across concrete in 1,000 pieces. "Yes, sir," Rocco said immediately. Giovanni looked at Sofia once more. Emma had already fallen quiet in her arms, her small fingers still clutching the rainbow fabric, her breathing steady now. "You kept her safe," he said. "I won't forget this." Then he returned to the lead SUV, his men falling into formation around him. Within seconds, the vehicles were moving, merging back into traffic, disappearing down Paradise Road like they had never existed at all. Sofia stood frozen on the sidewalk, Emma asleep against her shoulder, the broken wine still dripping from the concrete at her feet. She had no idea what had just happened. She had no idea who that man was, or why his voice had sounded like thunder, or why her entire body was trembling as though she had narrowly escaped something catastrophic. What she didn't know was that she had just caught the attention of the most powerful man in Las Vegas. She didn't know that in 7 days, her life would fall apart and be rebuilt in ways she couldn't imagine. She didn't know that Giovanni Castelliano never forgot a face, never forgot a debt, and never, ever left a person who had shown him kindness without ensuring that kindness was repaid 1,000-fold. She only knew that Emma was safe. She only knew that somehow, against all odds, she had pulled a child back from the edge of chaos. The city continued around her. Buses passed. Tourists laughed. The afternoon sun beat down on the pavement. And Sofia Voss had no idea that everything was about to change. Hours later, in a penthouse 40 stories above the city, Giovanni sat in his office and watched the security footage. Not the moment on the street, he needed no video to remember that. He watched the moments before. He watched Sofia Voss arrive at the hotel earlier that day, watched her carry heavy trays despite the way she limped slightly on her left foot, watched her refuse the offered chair in the kitchen, watched her eat the leftover food from a plate rather than purchase anything of her own. He watched the way she moved through the world like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. "That woman," Rocco said carefully, standing near the window, watching his boss's profile. "She works at the Venetian. Nanny position, evening shift. Her history is clean." Giovanni didn't respond. He simply watched the screen, watching Sofia Voss move through the hotel kitchen like a ghost, quiet, careful, invisible to everyone except the child who reached for her hand whenever she passed. "Find everything," he said finally. "Every detail. Every financial record. Every person she owes money to. I want to know what she needs." Rocco exchanged a look with Theo. In 15 years, they had watched their boss do many things. But they had never seen him do this, investigate someone, not to find leverage or weakness, but simply because he wanted to understand them. "Yes, sir," Rocco said. Something cold and dangerous stirred in Giovanni's chest. He had spent his entire life taking what he wanted, destroying what threatened him, building an empire that bent only to his will. But watching that woman hold his daughter, watching her move with such care, such tenderness, such absolute absence of self-interest, it had cracked something open inside him. Something that had been closed for a very long time. He didn't know yet what he would do with this feeling. He only knew that it was there, growing like a seed beneath concrete, and that it would not let him rest. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the edge of the city, Sofia Voss was counting money by lamplight. $78. That was all she had left after rent, after the medications her mother needed, after the groceries she had stretched across 2 weeks like a magician pulling endless scarves from empty pockets. $78. And the foreclosure notice on the kitchen table read $125,000 in 2 weeks. The $78 lay spread across the twin mattress like a confession. 23 ones, 2 fives, 120, 18 crumpled singles that Sofia Voss had counted 3 times by lamplight, knowing the math would not change no matter how many times her trembling fingers arranged them into new configurations. $78. That was everything. Everything she had left after rent, after her mother's medications, after the groceries she had stretched across 2 weeks like a magician pulling endless scarves from empty pockets. The foreclosure notice sat beside the money on the mattress. Summit Bank. Final notice. $125,000 owed in 14 days or her mother's house in Henderson goes to auction. The number seemed to mock her, printed in cold official font, the kind of font that did not care about mercy or circumstance or the fact that her mother's voice on the phone that morning had trembled when she said, "Don't worry about me, Mija. I will figure something out." Sofia lived in what had once been a linen closet in the Langford mansion. 8 feet wide, a single window that looked out onto the manicured garden she was forbidden to touch, a twin mattress pressed against one wall, a plastic rod for hanging her 3 work uniforms, and a lamp that cast everything in pale yellow like an old photograph of a life that was not quite real. She turned off the lamp and sat in darkness, listening to the house settle around her. The Langford mansion was all soaring ceilings and Italian marble and oil paintings of people who had never worried about $78 in their lives. Somewhere down the hall, Jason and Melissa slept in their bedroom with its twin 4-poster beds and hand-painted murals of enchanted forests. She had tucked them in 3 hours ago, had listened to their prayers, had felt the weight of their small arms around her neck when they said, "Love you, Sofia." It hollowed her out every single time. Her grandmother's recipe book sat on the plastic crate that served as her nightstand. The cover was faded green linen, the spine held together with string because the binding had given up years ago. Inside, every margin was filled with notes in Nonna's faded ink. Instructions underlined twice. Warnings about temperature and timing. And beneath recipes for osso buco and panna cotta and pasta carbonara, there were notes in Italian, little prayers, little love letters written in ingredients. For the family, Nonna had written beneath the tiramisu recipe, "This brings them home." Sofia picked up the book and breathed in. Vanilla and old paper and something that smelled like memory. She had brought this with her to the Langford mansion because it was the only beautiful thing she owned. Everything else, her clothes, her shoes, her phone with the cracked screen, was functional. Necessary. Temporary. But the recipe book was permanent. It was proof that she had come from somewhere. That someone had loved her enough to write it down. 5 in the morning came early. The Langford twins needed breakfast. Sofia moved through the mansion's kitchen in darkness, her hands knowing the rhythm of this routine so completely that she could do it unconscious. Toast with cinnamon. Apple slices arranged in careful patterns. The juice poured exactly to the line they had drawn on their cups with markers, because Melissa got upset if the juice was too full and Jason refused to eat if his toast was cut in triangles instead of squares. Carrots and hummus for snacks. Sandwiches built to precise specifications. Peanut butter on wheat. No crust. Exactly 3 grapes in the container, not 4, not 2. 3 grapes. The children woke to the smell of breakfast, stumbling into the kitchen in their pajamas. Melissa was 7 years old with her mother's blonde curls, and Jason was 9 with serious eyes that noticed too much. Sofia was not their mother. This was something that hurt in the quiet hours, when she was alone with this knowledge. "Good morning, my loves," she said, and they came to her with their arms open, and she held them against her body like they were anchors and she was drowning. By 7:30, they were dressed. By 8, they were in her 1997 Honda Civic with its 240,000 miles and its check engine light that had been glowing orange for 3 months. Sofia had ignored the light because the mechanic had quoted $1,200 for the repair, and she did not have $1,200. She did not have $1 of the $1,200. She had $78. She was going to die in this car, probably on the highway, and her last thought would be that she should have taken it to the mechanic. Private school drop-off was at 8:15. The Langford twins wore uniforms that cost more than Sofia's weekly groceries. Navy blazers with the school crest. Pleated skirts and pressed shirts. They held hands with Sofia as she walked them to the gates, and other parents looked through her like she was glass, like she was part of the scenery, like she was not quite real. By 8:30, she was back at the mansion, and the day stretched before her like a sentence she had to serve. The children's rooms needed attention. Toys returned to their designated shelves. Melissa's bed made with hospital corners. Jason's desk organized by subject. Sofia moved through these spaces with the precision of a woman who had nothing left to give except perfect attention to the details of other people's lives. The Langford mansion had 9 bedrooms, and 3 of them were hers to maintain. She cleaned bathrooms with bleach that burned her hands. She vacuumed carpet that had never seen a footprint that wasn't the Langfords. She dusted photographs of the family on their holidays, Aspen, Hawaii, the Greek islands, places that existed in a completely different universe from the one Sofia inhabited. Mrs. Sophie Langford was 47 years old and beautiful in the way that money makes possible. Blonde hair that was definitely not natural but looked inevitable anyway. Hands that had never been rough. She moved through her own home like she was walking through a photograph of herself, always aware of how she looked from every angle. She passed Sofia in the hallways without acknowledgement, the way people pass furniture, the way they acknowledge the absence of something rather than the presence of something. The Langford children hugged Sofia goodbye when their father picked them up for school. Their small bodies against hers, their voices saying her name with such certainty, such love. It was the cruelest part of this job, that they loved her while their mother could not see her. By 3 o'clock, Sofia was picking them up again. Homework supervision. Reading sessions where she did voices for picture books. Dinner preparation using the recipes she kept stored in her memory because she was not allowed to write on the Langford notepads. Bedtime stories read in the dark, her voice soft like a prayer. And then, at 10:30, after the children slept, she showered in the small bathroom attached to her linen closet room. The water was never quite hot enough. The shower head was weak, the spray like rain that had given up. She stood under it anyway, letting the water run over her shoulders, pretending it was washing something away. At 11 o'clock, she left the mansion and drove to the Venetian. The Venetian was where she became someone else. Not invisible exactly, but not quite seen. A waitress in a uniform that was supposed to fit a certain way, though the owners had ordered the size too small because they believed it increased tips. The uniform was black with white cuffs, and it pulled tight across her chest in a way that made her uncomfortable. She had altered it twice, but Douglas Hale kept ordering her to change it back. Douglas Hale was the restaurant manager, 42 years old with hair slicked back with something that made it shine under the lights like oil on water. His cologne arrived before he did, something expensive and cloying, designed to announce his presence. He worked the late shift, which meant he was always there when Sofia arrived, and he always positioned himself in places where she could not avoid him. Tonight, he was waiting by the service elevator. "Sofia," he said, and something in her chest tightened. She had learned to recognize this tone. It meant extraction. It meant the threat that lived underneath everything he said. "Mr. Hale," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Your tips from tonight. Hand them over." She clutched the bills. $43. $43, that meant gas money, that meant her mother's blood pressure medication for another week, that meant the difference between electricity being on or off on a cold October night. "Mr. Hale, I need." "You need this job," he said, and his smile did not reach his eyes. "Health insurance for your mother, right? Shame if you lost it over insubordination." She handed over the bills. He counted them slowly, deliberately, making her watch as he stole from her. "Good girl," he said. "And Sofia? That uniform is too tight. Customers are complaining. Wear something looser or I'll have to report you for inappropriate conduct." No customers had complained. This was the 6th month of this. She had reported him twice to HR. Both complaints had disappeared. Douglas's sister-in-law worked in HR. She worked the rest of the shift moving between tables like a ghost, clearing plates, refilling water glasses, existing in that strange space where she was invisible except when she was being stolen from. By 3 in the morning, when her shift ended, she had made $87 in tips. Douglas took 53 of them. She drove home in darkness, the October wind sharp and cold, making dead leaves skitter across the highway like small animals fleeing something terrible. The check engine light glowed steady orange on her dashboard. She ignored it the way she had learned to ignore so many things. Back at the mansion, she lay on her twin mattress and did the math one more time. $78 in her pocket. $340 from her next nanny paycheck. If Douglas left her any tips at all, maybe $500 total by the end of next week. $125,000 owed in 14 days. The numbers would never change. Her phone buzzed at 4 in the morning. A text from Mrs. Langford, sent from Aspen where the family had extended their trip. "We're staying longer than planned. Need you to stay with the children through the weekend. No additional pay, of course, it's part of your live-in arrangement." Sofia set the phone down and closed her eyes. What she did not know was that in 72 hours, a dry October blizzard would close the mountain passes, and her 1997 Honda Civic would stall on a dark stretch of highway, and the check engine light would stop mattering, and a convoy of black SUVs would emerge from the snow like rescue itself. She did not know that Giovanni Castelliano was at that very moment investigating her financial records, finding every detail of her desperation, and that something cold and dangerous was stirring in his chest, something that had been closed for a very long time. She only knew that she had $78 and 2 weeks to save her mother's house, and that the wind outside her window sounded like it was screaming. The October wind tore through the canyon like a blade wrapped in ice, and Sofia Voss sat shivering behind her steering wheel with both hands gripping the plastic like it might somehow keep her alive. The check engine light had glowed orange for 40 miles. Now the car wouldn't start at all. $78 in her pocket. 2 weeks until the bank owned her mother's house. No cell signal. No other cars. Just darkness so complete it swallowed sound itself, and the cold pressing against the windows like something alive and hungry. She turned the key again. The engine ground once, twice, then died into silence. Dead leaves scraped across the highway outside, pushed by wind that howled through the canyon with the sound of something in terrible pain. Her breath fogged the windshield in quick, panic clouds. She was a nanny. 27 years old but looking 40 from 6 years of double shifts and single meals eaten standing over a sink. Her hands were calloused from other people's children, her back curved from lifting their weight, her eyes hollowed from counting dollars that never added up. She pulled her thin jacket tighter. The jacket was 3 years old, purchased at a thrift store for $6, and it stopped the wind the way tissue paper stops a knife. Then she saw it. Light cutting through the darkness. Not one car. A convoy. 3 black SUVs emerging from the swirling snow like something conjured rather than real, and they were slowing. The lead vehicle pulled directly in front of her broken Honda. Doors opened. Men stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in charcoal suits that cost more than everything she owned combined. They moved with the particular confidence of people who had never been told no. The middle SUV's door opened. A man emerged wearing a black overcoat that hung from his shoulders like it had been tailored by someone who understood power. He was tall, 6'2" at least, with dark hair silvered at the temples and eyes the color of storm clouds before rain. A scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone like someone had once tried to mark him and failed to kill him. He approached her window with the measured stride of someone who had walked into dangerous rooms his entire life and found them all disappointingly easy. She rolled the window down 3 inches. "You need help," he said. His voice was low and rough, like something dragged across gravel. "Not a question. My car broke down. I just need a jump, or maybe to call a tow truck. No signal on this stretch of road. Storm's getting worse. Get in." He opened the passenger door of the middle SUV. "We'll take you where you're going." Sofia looked at her dead car. At the wind-tearing pine branches from trees like they weighed nothing. At the temperature dropping with every passing minute. "I don't know you," she said. His mouth moved at the corners, not quite a smile. "You're stranded in a blizzard on a mountain highway with no cell service. I'm offering a ride. You can freeze or you can trust me for 20 minutes. Both options are available." She reached over and grabbed her grandmother's recipe book from the passenger seat, the leather cover worn soft by decades, the margins filled with faded pencil notes in Italian that she could not read but knew were precious, and moved toward his SUV. The interior was warm. Leather seats. The kind of warmth that felt like salvation after 40 minutes in a car with no heat. She sat across from him. A driver in front. 2 large men she hadn't seen clearly before, one with a scar across his knuckles, the other with eyes that looked like they'd seen things that hadn't happened yet. They pulled back onto the highway. Giovanni Castellano, though she didn't know his name yet, noticed the recipe book in her white-knuckled grip. "Family heirloom. My grandmother's. Just recipes." She didn't mention that it was the only valuable thing she owned. That her mother had wrapped it in plastic 20 years ago and made Sofia promise to keep it safe. That she slept with it under her pillow now because the alternative was leaving it in a place where thieves lived. He nodded. Didn't press. The lodge appeared through the snow without warning. Timber and stone, massive, built into the mountainside like something that had grown there rather than been constructed. Floor-to-ceiling windows glowed warm yellow. The storm surrounded it like a living thing trying to break inside. Men in dark suits stood at the perimeter, guards, though she didn't understand that yet. Giovanni's men swept the building first, hands inside their jackets, eyes checking corners. Then he walked her inside. The great room was enormous. A stone fireplace rose 30 feet, and inside it, a fire burned with the kind of intensity that made her skin ache with wanting warmth. The scent of burning pine and leather and expensive cologne hung in the air. Wind howled against the windows like something alive and furious. Giovanni poured coffee from a silver carafe into a cup that probably cost more than her weekly rent. "Where were you heading?" "Henderson. My mother's house." She didn't mention the foreclosure notice. Pride wouldn't let her. He waited. He was very good at waiting. She broke. People always broke when someone waited long enough. "My mother is losing her house. $22,000. The bank is foreclosing in 2 weeks. I'm a nanny. I make $340 a week after taxes. I have $78 in my pocket." She laughed, but there was no sound in it. "I was going to see it one more time before they changed the locks." Giovanni's jaw tightened. Something flickered in his expression, ancient and cold. He was silent for so long that she thought she'd made a mistake trusting him. That she'd revealed too much to a stranger and would now be judged for her poverty the way everyone else judged her. 22,000, he said finally. Not a question. She nodded. 8:47 in the evening. The fire in the main fireplace flared without warning. Not natural. Not the normal shift of burning wood. The flames exploded outward in a burst that turned the color of chemical accelerant, and Giovanni was standing near it, his back turned, talking to Rocco about territory disputes when the heat drove him backward and his expensive coat caught fire. Sofia moved on instinct. The same instinct that had made her grab Emma from traffic 3 days earlier. She threw her coffee on the flames, not enough, and grabbed a decorative rug from the back of a sofa, tackled him, rolled him away from the fireplace, smothering the fire with her whole body. Her hands burned. Blistering heat that made her nerve endings scream. She didn't stop. She ripped his coat away, checked for injuries, found second-degree burns spreading across his left shoulder and neck like spilled ink. First aid kit, she said to no one in particular. Now. Thea was already moving. She cleaned the wounds with methodical calm, hand steady even though her own world was collapsing in real time. Years of training children taught her how to move through crisis without falling apart. She applied burn gel. Bandaged carefully. Did not cry. Giovanni watched her face the entire time. He said when she finished. Paradise Road. 3 days ago. My daughter. Sofia paused with her hand still on his shoulder. That was your daughter? The little girl? Emma. You pulled her from traffic. He caught her wrist gently. You didn't know it was my daughter. She was scared. No one else was helping. And why help me now? Same reason. You needed help. She pulled her hand back. I don't want anything from you. Rocco and Theo exchanged a look. Rocco's jaw tightened. In 15 years working for Giovanni Castellano, they had never seen him like this, vulnerable, letting someone touch him, watching a woman with something that looked like recognition. Like memory. Giovanni stood. Steadied himself against the mantel. You have a name. Sofia Voss. Sofia Voss, you saved my daughter. Now you saved me. He moved toward a side window where the storm pressed black glass against the lodge. I don't forget debts. At that same hour, 3 blocks away from the Venetian Hotel, Douglas Hale stood in his office counting stolen money. $340 from Sofia alone this week. He was on the phone with Sophie Langford, the platinum-haired owner of the hotel, whose smile cut like broken glass. The nanny girl reported you again, Sophie said, her voice dripping with amusement. 4th time this month. HR buried it. Your sister-in-law's efficient. Sophie laughed. She's so earnest it's pathetic. I pay her $340 to raise my children and she acts grateful. Did you know she turned down a $10 tip last week because she thought it might be accidental? Why keep her? Because watching someone that good-hearted struggle is entertaining. She'll break eventually. They always do. They talked for another 3 minutes about the various ways they could squeeze Sofia harder, make her choices smaller, her days longer. They had money. They had power. They had the particular cruelty of people who had never been told no. Back at the lodge, Sofia couldn't sleep. The wind outside sounded like screaming. She sat in a guest room with her grandmother's recipe book open on her lap, reading margins she didn't understand, when Giovanni found her at 2 in the morning. You can't sleep either, he said. She shook her head. He sat beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the heat from his body. He took the recipe book gently from her hands and read one of the margin notes aloud in perfect Italian, pronouncing each word like he'd been born speaking it. My father was from Naples, he said. Before he became what he became. They talked until sunrise crept through the windows, about recipes and regret, about children and the price of keeping them safe, about the specific exhaustion of people who had learned young that the world was not designed for their survival. Sofia forgot to be afraid. Giovanni forgot to be what he was. But in another room, he was on the phone before dawn broke. 3 calls. Each one precise. Each one about a man named Douglas Hale and a woman named Sophie Langford. Each one beginning with the same 4 words, find them and fix it. What she didn't know was that those calls had already changed everything. 7 days had passed since the mountain lodge. 7 days of Sofia returning to the Langford mansion like a ghost, moving through familiar rooms, serving children who loved her, watching Douglas Hale steal $52 from her tip jar while Sophie Langford pretended she didn't exist. The foreclosure notice sat on her apartment desk, the numbers still the same, $22,000 due in exactly 1 week. She had counted her remaining money 3 times by lamplight. $78. That was all. The November afternoon was grey and collapsing inward when Sofia sat on her mattress in that converted closet bedroom, the one she rented for $450 a month from a landlord who never fixed anything. Rain drummed against the single small window. Her phone buzzed on the blanket beside her. Unknown number. Her hand hesitated before answering. Miss Voss. A man's voice, calm and measured. Look outside. She moved to the window. Her breath caught. 50 men in black suits stood in perfect formation across the Langford mansion's circular driveway below. 25 black SUVs lined the street like a parade of predators. The November cold seemed to sharpen everything, the dark fabric of their coats, the focused stillness of their bodies, the way they stood as though they had rehearsed this exact configuration 1,000 times. At the center of them all stood Giovanni Castellano in a charcoal overcoat that cost more than Sofia earned in a year. His arms were crossed. His eyes were raised toward the windows where Mrs. Langford now stood, her mouth open like a question she couldn't form, her phone pressed against her ear in a gesture that meant nothing now, that would mean nothing anymore. Sofia's legs moved before her mind caught up. She was down the back staircase, through the kitchen, out into the November cold that bit through her uniform like teeth. The wind carried the smell of rain and wet concrete and something else, finality, maybe, or consequence arriving in physical form. Giovanni saw her emerge onto the driveway. He nodded once, a movement so small it could have been invisible to anyone but her. She walked toward him across the circular drive, her feet finding pavement, her heart finding something that wasn't quite rhythm anymore. Sofia Voss, he said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath carved into stone. What is this? The words came out shattered, barely a whisper. A debt paid. He extended an envelope toward her. The paper was cream-colored, expensive, the kind of envelope that held either wedding invitations or verdicts. She opened it with fingers that didn't feel like they belonged to her anymore. A check. $125,000. Her name printed in the pay to the order of line in handwriting that belonged to no bank she knew. I can't, she couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't breathe the words that came after. You can. You will. Giovanni's eyes held no negotiation. $22,000 for your mother's house. The medical bills she carries. Your car. 6 months of living expenses beyond that. Everything else is for a future you haven't let yourself imagine yet. Behind him, Rocco stepped forward, one of the men she'd seen at the lodge, older now, his eyes softer than a man in his position should possess. He placed a second envelope into her other hand. Restaurant consulting contract, Giovanni said. My name is on the letterhead. Your name will be too. When you're ready. If you choose it. Sofia looked at the check. At the 50 men standing in formation like witnesses to her transformation. At this dangerous man who had walked out of a blizzard and into her life like a question that demanded answering. Why? She asked. Because you saved my daughter's life that night at the lodge. Because you pulled me from a fire when you could have run. Because you asked for nothing. I respect that more than you know. His jaw tightened slightly. And because some people need to learn what happens when they steal from people who have already lost everything. Inside the mansion, Sophie Langford stood at the window watching her world rearrange itself into something unrecognizable. Her face had gone the color of ash. Meanwhile, 3 blocks from the Venetian Hotel, Douglas Hale was in his office counting stolen tip money when the door opened without a knock. 12 men in black suits, not Giovanni's men, not quite. These belonged to someone else entirely. Marco Moretti's organization. The men who ran the Northern Territories, who operated on codes that predated casinos and understood one principle above all others: you did not steal from workers. You did not humiliate the desperate. There were limits even in this world, lines that when crossed demanded answers. Douglas's face went white before they ever touched him. "What are you doing?" I don't even," his voice cracked like thin ice. "You know Sofia Voss?" Marco asked. His smile was the smile of a man who already knew the answer. Douglas's legs buckled. "The nanny? What does she?" Wrong answer. The men lifted him by his collar, his feet leaving the carpet, his body understanding surrender before his mind could catch up. They walked him through the service corridors, past kitchens and storage rooms, toward the basement exit where nobody would see. His screaming faded into the concrete and machinery sounds of the hotel's hidden architecture. Security footage would show he left voluntarily. His car would remain in the parking lot for 3 weeks before the towing company claimed it. But Douglas Hale would never return to the Venetian. Never return to anything, really. The Moretti organization had decided he owed them an education in consequence. They were patient teachers. At that same hour, Sophie Langford was at a charity luncheon at the Bellagio, surrounded by Las Vegas elite, her diamonds catching light, her smile constructed from 30 years of practice at being untouchable. 8 FBI agents walked through the ballroom doors with badges catching the same light as her diamonds. The sound of their shoes on marble. The particular silence that follows when everyone knows something has shifted and there is no negotiating with gravity. Sophie Langford, the lead agent said, her voice steady as a verdict. "You're under arrest for wage theft, tax evasion, and fraud." The handcuffs came out. Sophie's face twisted, and in that moment she was no longer a woman but a creature, all beautiful surfaces stripped away, all cruelty made visible. She screamed at Sofia, who was still standing outside with Giovanni, the check still in her trembling hands. "You did this! You little—" An agent placed a hand on her elbow, and Sophie's words dissolved into the kind of sounds that don't have language, that don't need it. Federal prison. 40 years minimum. Giovanni's men had spent 7 days feeding the FBI documentation, doctored payroll records, stolen wages from 43 employees stretching back a decade, tax schemes that spiraled into fraud territories. By the time Sophie reached the detention center, her assets had been frozen. Her accounts locked. Her social standing evaporated like morning frost in November sun. Not death. That would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. This was something slower. This was the systematic unraveling of everything she believed made her untouchable. Back on the driveway, Giovanni watched Sofia absorb the weight of what justice actually looked like when it arrived wearing black suits and moved with purpose. "Did you?" Sofia started. "I made phone calls," he said. "The Morettis and FBI did the rest. I simply provided information. The truth has a way of being useful when it reaches the right people." Sofia should have been horrified. She should have been afraid of what this man was capable of, what he had become through years of living in the spaces where law and consequence negotiated their separate peace. But instead she felt something else, a weight lifting, a door closing on a chapter written in exhaustion and humiliation. She looked at the check one more time. At her name printed there in ink that turned numbers into possibility. "I need to think about the restaurant," she said carefully. "The consulting contract." Giovanni nodded. "You know where to find me." The convoy pulled away from the Langford mansion in perfect formation, 50 men moving as though they shared a single consciousness, black SUVs disappearing into Las Vegas traffic until the driveway was empty again and only November rain remained, drumming against pavement, washing away the shapes of what had stood there. Sofia stood alone in that rain holding a check for $125,000 and a future that had been written not by her own hands but had somehow become hers anyway. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. The penthouse window framed Las Vegas like a jewel dropped into an endless desert. Sofia Voss stood alone in that frame, watching the city breathe below her, a woman who had counted $78 3 times by lamplight now overlooking a skyline that belonged to someone else's dream. Her black cocktail dress caught the glow of 1,000 lights. Diamond earrings caught fire at her ears, a gift from her mother with money Sofia had given her after the house was paid in full. 1 year. 12 months since that October blizzard, since her car broke down on a mountain highway and everything changed. Nonna's restaurant occupied the corner of 5th and Carson, reservation list full 2 months ahead. Michelin star within 90 days. Sofia's name appeared in every review, culinary director, visionary, the woman who brought her grandmother's kitchen to life on a plate. She had designed every dish from the margins of that recipe book, notes her nonna had written between instructions, little prayers and memories and whispered secrets that somehow translated into food people would stand in line for hours to taste. The book still lived in a frame on the restaurant's entrance wall now, preserved behind glass with a plaque beneath it, in memory of the women who taught us that love is fed through food and sacrifice. The sound came first, the balcony door sliding open behind her, then footsteps on tile. Giovanni Castelliano walked toward her wearing dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled, no jacket despite the November wind. The scar through his left eyebrow caught the penthouse light like a wire of silver. He looked older than a year should allow, tired in the way of a man who had been running an empire while trying to remember how to be human. But when he saw her, he smiled. Sofia. Giovanni. 3 feet separated them. The space held entire conversations they had not yet had. The restaurant is doing well, he said. Better than well. You have a waiting list. She turned fully to face him. You must know that already. You probably know everything about it. I know the numbers. I do not know if you are happy. That is different. His voice dropped lower, that deep timbre she had learned to recognize in a year of careful distance. Are you? Sofia considered the question with the same precision she brought to every decision now. I am unburdened. That is close to happiness. My mother sleeps in the house she raised me in. The Langford children write me letters, their new nanny is not the same, they say. I visit them once a month. Mrs. Langford moved to Phoenix after the FBI investigation. My future is not written by other people's hands anymore. But, he asked, and the words sat between them heavy with all the things she had not said. She moved to the balcony. The wind carried the sound of traffic below, music bleeding from casinos, the hum of a city that never slept. Giovanni followed. Las Vegas spread before them like fallen stars, infinite and alive, and somewhere out in that vastness people were living lives she would never touch, happy in ways that did not cost anything, unburdened by salvation. Why did you really help me? Sofia asked. The truth. Not the debt answer or the knight-errant fantasy. Why me? Giovanni was quiet for so long she could count her own heartbeats. When he finally spoke, his eyes remained fixed on the city below, on the lights that had guided him through a life she was only beginning to understand. When I was 7 years old, my father beat my mother unconscious for burning dinner. I tried to stop him. He broke my arm in 2 places. I was screaming loud enough for the entire neighborhood to hear, and a woman came. A neighbor. Maybe 90 pounds, widow who lived alone in a studio apartment. She walked into my father's house with nothing but her own body between him and us. She pulled him off my mother, called the police, stayed with us until the ambulance came. My father could have killed her. She would have died in our hallway and no one would have called it anything but collateral damage. She did not care. He turned to Sofia finally, and in his eyes she saw something raw, something that had been locked away for decades. She saw someone who needed help and she moved. No calculation. No expectation. Just action. You are that woman, Sofia. You save people you do not know. You saw my daughter bleeding in a fireplace and you pulled her out with your own hands, even though you had no idea who I was or what I could do to you. Then you saved me. You did not want a reward. You wanted nothing from me except my gratitude, and you barely even wanted that. You could have helped anyone, Sofia said, but even as the words left her mouth she knew it was the wrong thing to say. I did not want to help anyone. I wanted to help you. He moved closer. The wind pulled his hair, and she saw the boy in him then, the child with the broken arm, the man who had spent his entire life around people who wanted something, who asked for rewards and guarantees and protection. I have spent my entire life with people who want something. Money. Power. The promise of tomorrow. You asked for nothing. Even when I gave you the check for $125,000, you tried to refuse it. That money was yours to give. It was. And you almost gave it back. He reached for her hand without taking it, offering instead of claiming. I need you to know something, Sofia. I have carried this truth for a year. Since the blizzard. Since I watched you move without fear, without hesitation, and I realized I had forgotten what that looked like. You changed something in me. Made me remember who I wanted to be before this life took it and replaced it with something else. Every hour of this past year, I have been trying to become the man you saw when you looked at me in that lodge, not the monster I am, but the person I could be. Sofia's breath caught in her throat. She looked at his hand, at the scars running across his knuckles like a map of violence and power, and she thought of Emma sleeping in the restaurant kitchen while Sofia tested recipes, the little girl who had called her Vivi and later, almost accidentally, Mama Vivi, the word slipping out during a nightmare Sofia had stayed awake to soothe. I see you, Giovanni. Both parts. The monster and the man. She took his hand, and his palm was warm against hers, solid as an oath. And I am not afraid. He kissed her then, slow and deliberate, a year of waiting compressed into one moment. The city glittered below. The wind carried the scent of desert sage and distant rain. When they broke apart, he whispered something she would carry with her into every day after. What happens now? Sofia smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had learned to believe in futures that belonged to her. Now we see who we become together. The montage arrived like a song, Emma now 5, running through Nonna's kitchen in a purple apron while Sofia scooped her up, spinning her in circles, Giovanni watching from the doorway with an expression his men had never witnessed, unguarded joy written across his scarred face. Sofia and Giovanni at charity galas, funding domestic violence shelters, his mother's memory honored through every dollar they gave away. Emma's birthday party with candles and laughter, Sofia and Giovanni cutting the cake together while the little girl clapped. Her mother smiling in the house Sofia had saved, healthy and unburdened at last. 1 year later on that same penthouse balcony, Sofia's head rested on Giovanni's shoulder, his arm around her waist. Inside, Emma slept on the couch, her small hand clutching the grandmother's recipe book. Sofia had read her the margin notes as bedtime stories until the child's breathing deepened into sleep. The city breathed below them, infinite and alive. Do you ever miss the simplicity? Giovanni asked. Before all this? I miss nothing, Sofia said. I have everything. The Las Vegas skyline glowed beyond them, the desert vast and ancient and patient, waiting for the next person who would need saving, for the next moment when one hand reached out at the right moment. Douglas Hale was never found. Sophie Langford served 40 years in federal prison, her wealth and beauty unable to purchase redemption in a cell where light arrived measured in hours. Sophia's mother lived in the house Sofia grew up in, the mortgage paid in full. Nonna's restaurant had a 2-month waiting list. Emma called Sofia Mama Sofia. Sometimes the right person finds you exactly when you need them most. Sometimes one hand reached out at the right moment can change an entire life. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.